Good morning. You're listening to Central Wisconsin's 24-hour information station, AM 1320 WFHR. It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. Now, with the Morning Magazine, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's show on AM 1320 and streaming live at WFHR.com. We also welcome our friends from Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. Normally, I'd be welcoming Jesse, but there's nobody here. Actually, Pam, technically, I guess, would be the person. She started the camera because the crew at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media are at an important conference out of town, so they set up the camera last night and showed Pam on where to push, how to start it, and voila, we're here on Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. And the reason why, it's our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Carl, and good morning to our listeners.
Okay, well, busy night with the Wisconsin Rapids Common Council, and one of the items, I guess, got postponed or because of bargaining, and people have been talking about it, is that residency requirement for emergency personnel. Why don't you give us an update on that? Because folks have called me about it.
And maybe a little background, too. This item was referred to the council by Alderperson Shane Blazer, who expressed a desire to have a less restrictive ordinance related to residency, and therefore it would allow city employees to live further from the city. Because it's a subject of bargaining, of negotiations related to our protective service unions with our police and fire groups. The decision last night was to postpone that item until the bargaining occurs by the unions or with the unions, and that item will be considered as part of those discussions and negotiations. So again, the proposal that Alderperson Blazer wanted to see was that our residency related to emergency personnel be expanded so folks can live further from the city that work in emergency services.
Okay. And the council did unanimously approve a resolution in support of the Tribune Building Project, the Incourage Foundation's Tribune Building Project, as part of the packet of stuff that's going to Madison to show community support. Hopefully get some state money for that project. Right.
So this item was discussed at the Committee of the Whole, where the council discussed, and last night a unanimous resolution was passed in support of that project. So that was a resolution that the council had drafted and then ultimately approved last night at its meeting. And like you said, it'll go alongside those requests or requests of community organizations for support of the project. So the council was able to affirm their support for the project. With that,
the Y and project and Triangle, there's a lot of stuff going on in terms of construction in Wisconsin Rapids. Does that give you an additional selling point when you're, say, giving a tour to a business person or someone's thinking of coming to our community?
Well, certainly projects that are under construction are a lot better to show off in the sense that there's actually something happening. I know when we host businesses and folks that want tours or even prospective employees, that might be looking to move to the community. I know there's a lot of groups, realtors and the hospital and others do kind of community showcase tours throughout town, and it's great to see construction activity happening, at least at the mall. Right now they're doing their asbestos remediation internally, so it doesn't look like there's a lot of things. Can't really see anything happening other than they've been doing some temporary water connections and power connections, but the work's been inside. But following that asbestos remediation and abatement, they'll begin demolition of part of the structure that they will not need for the ultimate project for the YMCA or the Boys and Girls Club purposes.
Okay. Now, one thing that you and I talked about, let's talk first off about the city clerk position, vacancy there and how to fill it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we had an election this last spring to fill that position, right? And that individual, I think, as we previously discussed, resigned from the position as they became ineligible to hold the office when their residency changed. And so, as part of the state statute, the mayor has the appointment authority to recommend an appointment to the city council. It has to be confirmed by the council ultimately to fill the position. And it's been discussed at the committee of the whole whole level, which is the group of alderpersons outside of the council meeting, to talk about whether or not they wanted to call a special election as soon as next spring. Because it's too early to technically call a special election, they can't do so until our November council meeting. Last night it was decided that staff should draft language that would thereby call a special election in the spring for the filling of the position. Now, on a more near-term basis, the city clerk's position is an important role, an officer within the city, and therefore we're in the midst of screening applicants for an appointment to the position. It would only be about a 6-month appointment where that person then would have to run for the position come spring and actually run their first election with their name on the ballot. So it's kind of a strange thing. I've advocated for the thought that perhaps we hold an election the following year, so it would be a year into the person's appointment, but then 2 years left on the term. But it sounds like the council is going to pursue an election as soon as next spring. So it'll be interesting. It's not that somebody can't learn how to run an election, but there are nuances that you don't learn in an education or a course or a training. So to have those individuals seeking the position for an election that they're running at the same time is kind of a unique circumstance. So that'll happen, is my understanding, come November. We'll see, but it'll happen as soon as next spring.
Okay. Now, we should mention there was a ceremonial oath of office for a new member of the police department. Mm-hmm. Officer Paul, is it Zalewski?
Yes, Zalewski, and we've had a number of new officers this year and the last year. The department is definitely got a number of new and fresh and young faces, and we had another one join the ranks last night. It's been a challenge for the city and protective service agencies around our area and across the state, I believe, from their recruitment standpoint, that our eligibility lists, the lists that we maintain after they go through the academy in the case of the police department, or in case of the fire department when they seek their certification and their exams, that those eligibility lists have been very short. In fact, our fire department right now doesn't have an eligibility list. There's not a single individual that qualifies for us to fill a vacancy there. So it's a major concern, I think, for cities as they're trying to recruit talent. I think part of it is dependent upon the fact that fewer people are going into those professions for a variety of reasons. I think it's also a function of a very tight labor market, that as we see unemployment rates at historic lows, we're feeling the effects as an employer of those circumstances as well.
So how, does that call for some out-of-box thinking in terms of recruitment and the like?
I think so. We're seeing in talking with the chiefs and hearing from them what their peers are discussing, it is. I mean, you're seeing in some cases sign-on bonuses, but when you see, for example, the Fox Valley, which is a much larger labor market, faced with the same challenges that we are in a smaller market, it's a major concern, because you wonder how long is that pipeline or that shortage going to last, where there isn't a pipeline of incumbent public safety workers. And so I think it's a major concern. And we've looked at our compensation package. We're at market or above market with our starting pay and or at least with our step-up pay. So it isn't a function of wages necessarily, as it is interested individuals and those that are able to pass the credentialing.
And is this something that maybe the state's going to have to do something about, to try and encourage people entering those professions?
I think so. It's hard to put in financial resources or kind of off-market forces, because it creates sometimes the wrong incentives and wrong impressions.
Right.
But I think what we're doing locally anyways is our police and fire departments are making conscious efforts to get into the classrooms. In many cases, our fire department hosts ride-alongs and internships that individuals that are going through an internship at the Wisconsin Rapids Fire Department, for example, are more likely to apply to be a professional firefighter or paramedic in our fire department. So it's little steps like that, little initiative that we need to take to not so much rely on the good labor market and labor pool,
sure,
but to be a bit more proactive.
If you're just joining us on the Morning Magazine, welcome. It's our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. Phone lines are open at 715-424-2600. 1-800-800-5600 if you wish to talk to the mayor. Let's talk about garbage. We've got, people have gotten used to the recycling bins, and we've gotten used to that, and we know that phase 2 eventually was to get something similar for garbage.
That's right. So we're still wading through the variety of questions that need to be answered related to the service that we provide for garbage pickup. But one of the things that was decided last night is we are pursuing automated pickup with the purchase of two garbage or refuse trucks that will have the automated collection modifications made to the truck. So we know that for certain. We're still going to work through things like, there's a number of impacts. Leaf pickup, for example, we're amidst the season right now. That service is generally provided because we have retired garbage trucks that double as leaf pickup trucks. And once we move to this new automated collection system, when those garbage trucks get beyond their useful life, there's a question of how we're going to administer leaf pickup, or are we going to provide leaf pickup? And that was an item that was actually discussed at the last Public Works Committee. It sounds as if there's a desire to continue to provide that service. But we do know that automated garbage collection will happen. It may happen as soon as spring of next year. We're shooting for a mid-year launch or a late spring launch, so probably in the May timeframe. But frankly, we've been faced with some garbage truck challenges that we can limp along, but if we happen to have a major outage of a truck for a period of time, that may accelerate our schedule. But as we experienced with recycling, we don't want to launch it in the middle of winter. To deliver the bins in a snowstorm like we did in some cases when we launched recycling was a challenge for not only for the operators that were delivering it, but also for residents as they tried to make room for this new bin and all of that. So a number of the things have been figured out, like the size of the bins there's been consensus on that. Bulk item pickup, I think there's ample opportunities for the city to get out of the business of providing bulk item pickup. We happen to be very fortunate to have a landfill in our own community, fortunate or unfortunate, however you want to look at that issue. But the access to disposing of very large items is very much in our neighborhood. Many communities don't have a landfill, so disposing of large items is a bit more of a chore or a task. So I believe we're going to get out of the bulk item pickup business. Plus, that allows us to reallocate labor dollars to other maintenance activities, roads, for example. An item that we continuously hear that we should have more road maintenance activities. But it's those types of conscious decisions we need to make if we're going to free up dollars and reallocate elsewhere in our budget or in our public works budget in particular.
What about staff, the number of people that are working on the current garbage trucks? What will happen with them?
So in some respect, we've been forecasting that this was going to happen at some point. So when we had some retirements, we actually backfilled some of those positions with limited term employees, so LTEs. And so we've been rotating LTEs on the back of our garbage trucks as can carriers. So we won't be facing any job eliminations as a result of this, where people will lose their jobs. I can't say in the future that we may decide not to fill a position because we consciously made this decision to be more efficient, so we can reallocate those resources elsewhere in our budget. At the same time, we're up against flat budget expectations from the state, and so it becomes a difficult balancing act sometimes to balance the budget, given that most of our budget is wages and benefits. So should the time come where we're not able to balance the budget or wage increases come at the expense of eliminating a position that was vacated maybe through a retirement, I can't say that those circumstances may happen or may not happen soon.
How does the fact that this is an election year and that you never know what's going to happen in an election, but say there's some dramatic changes in Madison, a new governor or whatever, that can change the dynamic and all of a sudden in terms of the rules that you are going to be operating on once the new administration or the new leadership gets in power.
Right.
And so do you have to kind of subconsciously or something plan for that eventuality just in case? Or
well, our budgeting practices are very conservative, so we generally plan for the worst. We set aside reserves for fleet maintenance replacement, for example. Like generally, aside from a fire engine that we're going to replace probably in the 2019 budget through borrowing in some part, we've been setting money aside for that replacement, like we do in our public works construction, our public works department. That we maintain a healthy fleet maintenance and fleet replacement reserve. many budgets or some municipalities struggle with that because they didn't set up replacement accounts prior to Act 10 or levy limits coming in place. So they're borrowing for those things annually. Now we set aside reserves. We have replacement accounts within our budget. So on the one hand, our budget is somewhat inflated because we're setting money aside for future expenses. On the other hand, it keeps our tax increases flat, so you don't have spikes, big borrowing initiatives, for example, for fleet. So we definitely budget for the worst. I think when we look forward to new resources coming into play, fortunately we have a capital improvements plan for a replacement plan for much of our infrastructure that we need to plan long term. So we can tell legislators in Madison, for example, that we can't accomplish as much road reconstruction or road maintenance that we'd like, or for the sake of our maintenance of our entire system. And so therefore, if there were additional new resources that came into the picture, we would be able to articulate what we're going to do. So it's not a political process necessarily. Well, I'd like my street done. Well, no, we have a plan that this is the schedule at which these activities are going to occur.
Given that, so all of this in terms of budgeting and the like goes into what should a city do? What kind of services what do people want and are willing to pay for? So that's always a challenge for you and the council.
Yeah, and I think it's a major challenge when we talk about changing any services, right? Rightfully so. Many people don't like change. I consider myself at times one of those individuals as well. And so if we were to consider eliminating a service and starting a new service or growing a service at the expense of another service, which are the decisions we have to make in our current budget constraints, we oftentimes don't make those changes then because the council gets a few calls and says, well, we prefer we maintain that existing service, so therefore the new service doesn't occur. Or the change doesn't happen. And I think, sometimes our decisions or our hand is forced when fleet becomes obsolete or beyond its useful life, i.e. garbage, right?
Right.
We were at a juncture there. Do we continue to provide the same method of collection, or do we change? Does the new service, is it demonstrated to provide benefits and more efficiency for our operations, and therefore the new service won out?
Yeah. I would imagine in advance of that, there'll be a big public education campaign like there was with recycling.
We learned a lot in the launch of single stream recycling, and we're still learning. I'll admit that, even after launching this over a year ago. And so how we communicate with the public has changed, right? When we think about radio communications or newspaper and
you got social media,
right? So we're trying to reach as many residents through the various channels as possible, but residents have to listen, right? So we can send messages all day long, but if they're not being received, it puts us in a tough position. So we're trying to find ways. For example, we're going to be issuing a communication very soon, to the extent that people are going to have that option again of the size of their garbage bin. Smaller homes, if it's a 2-bedroom home, in a single stall garage, they may opt for a smaller garbage bin, which frankly is about the same size garbage that probably is consumed or that needs the need for a small home today. Now, if you have a large family or a family with a number of children, you're going to opt for the standard size, which would be the larger 96-gallon bin, which is the same size as our recycle bin. So it's a big garbage bin. And for somebody like me that puts out a bag every other week, perhaps, or maybe once a week, the small bin would be one that I'll opt for.
Yeah, so because like Pam and I, that's all.
Yeah. Well, and single stream recycling has afforded people the opportunity to recycle more, right?
Right.
So we're going to be sending out communication. So if folks want to sign up for the smaller recycle bin, or garbage bin, that they'll have to opt in for that. There isn't an automatic. So people will get a letter from the city, and they'll have to respond accordingly.
Okay. Before we go to break, it's been a cold fall so far. I mean, earlier this week, we actually had some power outage because of heavy wet snow on power lines and the like. How are we in terms of our snow removal budget going into this winter. There's some fear now that we might get an old-fashioned one.
Yeah, I saw some indications that it might be a cold and heavy or a wet winter, and I don't know if it's. I'm assuming we're going to get. That means snow.
That would mean snow.
Yeah. Well, we set aside annually reserves for snow removal. So when we don't spend money in a low snow removal year, we set those aside and segregate it in a snow removal budget. So we're sitting fine with adequate reserves. It's those small snow events or those heavy ice events that really wreak havoc on our budget. We'd actually like large snow events because we're moving that snow, whereas those ice events we're spending a lot of material cost, right? Because you're salting or pre-salting and you're salting during and you're trying to scrape the streets. So those create a mess. Plus they wreak havoc on actually the street surfaces, right? If we're going over a street surface for a 1 or 2 or 3 inch snowfall with ice or sleet, it doesn't. It's not as good as a large snow event.
Okay. Now, also, I've talked to you in the past and your predecessors, the cost that you have to pay for salt and the like. What's the market for that like?
I was just given a statistic, and I don't remember it off the top of my head, but our salt costs, when we came through the annual budget process, when Streets put together their budget, salt costs have just grown astronomically, and unfortunately, generally that means we buy less salt, right? If you have a fixed budget, but for at the same time we carry salt reserves and we do have cash reserves for snow removal activities. So that's one of those budgets that we don't have the option to remove it, right? Means and methods we may change how we do things in terms of removal and snow plowing, but generally the material costs are unforgiving, right? We have to acquire the material and keep it on hand.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take our first break, and the phone lines are open at 715-424-2600. If you have a question for Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink, want to talk a bit about the budget. It is budget writing time. Want to get into a little bit, too, about some of the Triangle Project, maybe some of the other projects going on in the city and any of your concerns. And we're looking at your concerns as well. So like I said, the phone lines are open at 715-424-2600 here on The Morning Magazine. Back with more right after this.
Good morning and welcome back to The Morning Magazine, presented by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. It's time for part 2. Once again, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and welcome back, everybody, to today's show on AM 1320 and streaming live at WFHR.com. We also welcome viewers watching us on Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. Video recording of this can be found on their excellent website or on your local public access station. The reason why, it's our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. Okay, we'll title this to put it all in one nice package. Project update.
Yeah.
A number of like I said, it's a good thing to have. Some people go, what, all this building and everything going on and blah, blah. I think it's a good problem to have. I'm sure, I know our hotel and motel owners are very happy to have all these construction workers in town and the like. So let's talk about one of the first ones I want to talk about. I go by it every day, the airport project. It's moving on, and basically the airport is shut down now.
That's correct. So for the month of October, generally the airport has been closed or will be closed, and that's because the primary runway, and that's the runway that takes most aircraft operations, while it was in good shape from a pavement standpoint, we knew that the pavement surface needed some maintenance, and so we actually were able to put in for another state program support for what we call a mill and overlay. So the top of the runway will be milled, and then now there will be an asphalt surface that'll go in its place. So it was a concrete surface, and the base will remain a concrete runway, but we're doing a mill and overlay of that project. And so because it's our primary runway and all the other activity that's happening outside of that with the other projects, the airport will be closed while that project is going on. And so the nice thing about that is it was largely a state-funded project. It was an 80-20, so the local our airport commission and the municipalities, owner municipalities, will have to encumber only 20% of the project cost. So we're receiving about $800,000 from the state, or maybe that's the entire project cost. So the good news is we'll be prolonging the life of that runway for at least a decade, and hopefully longer. So that'll be good. And so that's really the primary project that's happening at the airport right now. And then we also have the other, outside of that project, we've got the apron expansion, and that's the first part of the state aid payment, the $4 million that the airport was able to receive from the state to expand the hangar area. And there'll also be the partial parallel taxiway project that'll be built as part of this project, and then one in the spring.
And this is all a result of all that jet traffic, which Sand Valley has brought to the area.
Right.
And I guess it's gone, even talking to Jeremy, it's even gone beyond what you folks anticipated.
Yeah, just for perspective, we doubled our fuel consumption last year, and we actually doubled our fuel consumption this year from last year's numbers. So our operational statistics tell us that certainly this is a new era for the airport, and as a local public infrastructure, we have to respond positively to the demand, and so therefore, or it's going to go somewhere else, right? And from our perspective, we certainly would like that traffic to happen here. We've made a lot of investments at the same time, right? So while some might think, wow, the airport's making a lot of money on this airport traffic, we've also had to make a lot of investments, and we hope that by having this infrastructure here and all these improvements, that there will be a sector that can grow around the airport's infrastructure here. Look at Appleton. Gulfstream is doubling down on the Appleton airport. And while we're not going to be the next place for Gulfstream, for example, but there will be opportunities for us to pursue once the infrastructure is in place. It's just like any business. If it makes sense for that business to locate there because they can take advantage of the existing infrastructure, it makes it viable. And so we believe and we hope that there will be further interest in other sectors, maybe to site and base operations right at the airport on the field, or other industry in the area that relies on transient aircraft capability.
Yeah, it's another tool in your toolkit for business promotion and expansion.
That's right.
Okay. Now we go down the road a little bit, across the expressway, and one thing, pedestrian people can now, walkers and the like, don't have to go crossing the expressway. They can go underneath the expressway. Let's give an update on that East Riverbank project.
Yeah, we're nearing the end of our construction season, so we're getting nervous on all of our projects. Whether it's High Street over here, the East Riverbank reconstruction and revitalization project, that we hope these contractors can get them buttoned up so they don't have to carry into the next construction year. But I believe that, I'm an optimist that we're going to get a little bit warmer weather here, so it makes these guys' lives a little bit easier. They can work long days and even weekends if they need to get the projects wrapped up. But the East Riverbank project, all of the riverbank stabilization is now complete. Now that the river is receded, everyone can see the completion of the riverbank stabilization. So from the Elks, former Elks Club building in the city's downtown near the movie theater, all the way down to Demetz Park, the public-owned waterfront has now been stabilized. You mentioned the under-bridge connection. They haven't put in the new railing on that yet, but folks can certainly walk it and check it out. So that's a major safety improvement that I believe should have been done when the expressway was constructed in the 70s, but we built things in service of the automobile. We don't now. Today we build things in service of walkers and bikers and pedestrians alike. So it's great to have that improvement done on the south side of the improvement. The shade structure is now installed, and we're
That's
very
that
excited.
white one?
That's right.
What's that going to... Okay.
So it's been engineered and designed that based upon seasons, as well as where the sun's location is at, that there will be shade under that site all the time. So while it's a visual feature, it's an architectural feature, it will now be a shade structure as well. So folks will be able to utilize that instead of a closed pavilion. It's sort of an open air pavilion, but it has a utility in that it provides shade.
Okay, and that pavilion can be used for different
Right. We haven't put in all the furnishings. So all of the park benches, the picnic tables, the fitness stations that were fundraised for on a private project separate to this project, all those will be installed as they wrap up their landscaping. And that's really what you see in Demetz Park now is all the landscapers are finishing their work. And then they'll march down the road and they'll be finishing up and doing the grass planting in that along 2nd Street and 3rd Street as well in those areas.
Will they do that this year or after this? They will.
Yeah, you'll see felt kind of the seed blankets we call them being placed in those areas. I've checked out Demetz a number of times, folks. There's now a parking lot where people can get in there with construction activity while the park is officially closed. The park activity or the construction activity is really complete in Demetz Park, aside from some of the finishing work that needs to happen. So folks in the evening, if they're curious, they can park down there or walk down there and check out the paths and the underbridge connection.
Okay, and then we move down the street to the downtown, east side downtown, and the Triangle project site. Anything new on that?
So we still are in property acquisition mode. It's not the city's process that they're undertaking, but it's the private developers working on property acquisition. And that developer informs us that they're optimistic that they'll get something done yet this fall and winter, and hopefully be able to have an official project come spring.
No. Okay. And so come spring, would we be looking at maybe a groundbreaking ceremony of some kind?
Well, before groundbreaking, we'll see renderings. And once the property acquisition or not has been understood, then the developer will release some renderings for all of us to consider. And then formal negotiations between the city and the developer will happen.
Okay.
There hasn't been a sign on the dotted line because, frankly, we don't know how much of the property in that triangle will be developable at this stage.
Okay. Well, we got our first caller, and you're on the Morning Magazine with Mayor Vruwink. Your question or comment?
Good morning, guys. My name's Ron. Hey, I live in the town of Grand Rapids, and I travel County Trunk W into the city. And when I get to the signals by Home Depot there, the 54 County Trunk W signals, I've noticed in the last several weeks that the timing seems to be off on them a little bit. They don't seem to be running as efficiently as they used to. Most times when I'm traveling westbound to come into the city, and I get a red light at that signal there, it holds the traffic for a long time, and there's really nothing that's approaching that intersection from the west or from the north.
Okay. Your Honor, is there something that could be done to it?
Well, I was thinking the caller was referring to some of the detector loops because there's some actuation there, meaning that if there's traffic, then it triggers the signal.
And I know there was, or at least I thought there were some there, and they seem to be working, early on, and I mean up until maybe a month or so ago. Mm-hmm. But something seems to have happened to them. There's a lot of times that westbound traffic will queue up there. Maybe 6 or 12 vehicles, and then we just wait, and nothing's coming from the west or nothing's coming from the north. So,
sure.
for what it's worth.
Yeah.
So,
thanks for the call.
Not a complaint, just an observation. So.
Sure. Thank you. We did introduce new timing to the entire expressway system, and so we were part of the trial phase or the learning phase with that is where there areas that maybe got worse, or I think we generally don't hear if they get better, but certainly appreciate the input, and I'll make that known to engineering.
Yeah, I'm kind of suspecting that somebody was fiddling with the timing there. So, but whatever. So
we retimed the whole not the entire system, but the majority of the east side system was retimed. So there definitely could be an impact there, and I'll share that feedback with engineering.
Okay.
Hey,
thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you for the heads up. Yeah, something like that. You don't know about it, and engineering doesn't know about it until the gentleman did what we just did and call up, do you know what's happening here? Because that could cause, especially during rush hours, a bit of a traffic jam.
Well, yeah, traffic patterns change, right? And we see it now with the shuffling of ninth graders to Lincoln High School, and that has an impact on people's traffic patterns and traffic volume. Certainly, the Lincoln Street corridor near the expressway is impacted, and as well as we've heard input on 2nd Avenue and the expressway as well, that people that are going to middle school now to pick up kids or even just traveling that area, there's impact. And so, part of the challenge with timing is it's a point in time. Now, when we assess these things before we make a change, we want to make sure that we're taking all of that into account. Sometimes there's a trial period and adjustments that need to be made after the fact.
Well, it looks like you're going to be a popular person. We have another caller for you. You're on the Morning Magazine with Mayor Vruwink.
Good morning. How are you all?
We're doing fine, sir.
Good. Hey, I got one question for you. The old restaurant in the mall parking lot, why do I have to trim my weeds and grass and stuff like that, and they don't have to?
Well, it is owned by the YMCA, and they should be maintained and held to the same standard as everyone else in the city. And I know the ordinance control officer has been notified about the mall property in general, that there's been times, and even walking it the other day to the farmer's market, that I observed some things. So certainly appreciate the note, and we'll share that with our code enforcement officer, because I think you're not the only person that has brought that to our attention.
Yeah. I just drove by it, and it just looks terrible. And I thought, geez, I got to keep my lawn up, and why don't they? I mean, just because it's closed, it doesn't,
Right. Yeah, the YMCA owns it, and it's their responsibility to take care of it.
Maybe there's a need for direct communication with them to let them know that.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for the call.
Okay. Thank
you.
All right. And you're on the Morning Magazine with the mayor.
Hi. I live across the street from Quick Trip on 8th Street. There's been quite a few times where Pearson Avenue, right on the other side, in between Quick Trip and Papa Murphy's, I'd be coming from Walmart, and then right turn, a straight, and then a separate lane for a left turn. And there's no arrows on the road, but there's a sign a little ways farther back. Excuse me. And there's been a few times where I live right across the street at the Maple, and there's times where I'm sitting there waiting for traffic, and I've had people behind me beeping and telling me pointing for me to turn, and I indicate to them that I'm going straight, and they think that's just a right and a left turn.
Well, the one, are you on Griffith? Are you talking about Griffith?
It's parallel with Griffith.
The street between Quick Trip and the strip mall.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we can take a look at that. I don't know if our sign shop. I know the sign shop is still making some of the pavement markings for the year. They don't always last too long, and that could be an area that you're saying the pavement markings have maybe worn off.
Okay. Yeah, we had to drop them because of that beeping.
Okay.
But one area that Griffith constantly, I see folks going straight in the right-hand lane. That's a right turn only lane. And someone's going to drive right into the motel one of these days. I don't know what can be done to try and get people to realize that is not a straight. If you want to go straight, you got to be in the left lane.
Yeah, we've actually had callers on the air about that, right, Carl?
Yeah.
I think I'll make a note of and I'm not sure exactly what street that is that the caller was referring to, but we can make a note of that. I know I've talked with Arnie. We've had many a conversation about signage and markings and that on the 8th and Griffith intersection as well.
Okay, well, I'm going to take a quick break. I want the callers to be patient. We'll get to all your phone calls here on the Morning Magazine right after we take care of the bills. Welcome back to the Morning Magazine, our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. The phone lines are open at 715-424-2600. Those of you who want to go talk about your garage sales on Over the Back Fence, you got to wait till about 11:07. So we have a caller who's been patiently waiting, Your Honor, and you're on the air with the mayor.
Yeah, we got cut off.
Okay.
There is a sign right when you come out of Walmart that shows the arrows where you're supposed to go on the road going toward Day Street. But I think as far back as it is, some people probably don't see it. So I was thinking that maybe that sign could be moved a little closer towards 8th Street.
Sure, yeah, we certainly can look at that. There's generally a standard of how far we put those from the intersection, but, given all the other signage and buildings there,
he makes a good point. That's the same problem, I think, with the Griffith. The sign that says right lane is right turn only is back.
Sure.
And the people coming from behind Quick Trip there and turning right, they don't see that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's a good observation. Thank you.
Anything else, sir?
No, that'll do it.
Okay, well, thank you for your call.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. And let's get this caller. You're on the Morning Magazine.
Hello, I was calling about the snow removal and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they could do more of a salt-sand mixture, and then in the springtime they can use the street sweepers to clean the road and recycle the sand.
That's a good observation. The trouble is the DNR regulates our sweepings, and so when we do our sweeping collection, that actually has to be landfilled. But I like the idea. I know when we street sweep, we obviously pick up a lot of the aggregate or some of the aggregate that we put on our chip sealed streets too.
Yeah.
The trouble is there's contaminants, as they call it, and I don't believe that we're able to recycle it. But that's a good observation, and certainly can have a conversation to see if there is any ability for us to reutilize some of that.
Okay.
Thanks for the call.
Thanks for your suggestion.
Yep.
Bye-bye. And you're on the Morning Magazine.
Yeah, on your snow removal and salt, there's, I guess the county's going to a water brine system. Is the city going to be doing any of that? I'll get off the radio to listen.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
He anticipated one of my questions. I was going to
Sure.
ask you about that.
We actually did make provisions to have that as part of our whole process, and we do. Actually, last winter, if not the winter before, we started piloting it. We haven't rolled it out completely, but yeah, you'll notice in the county in particular, even on the interstates, bridges, they'll pre-salt those bridges and overpasses where there's a higher potential for freezing, and so we have been launching that, and I don't have any results to report. We certainly can talk about that as we get into our next upcoming months of meetings or discussions here. But yeah, we have launched it and trialing some brine. There's a whole beet juice is another one that's
I've heard of that one.
Used. Some of them creates a mess. You can imagine beet juice and the staining that can come from that. Anyway, yeah, we can talk more about the results of that in the future.
Maybe a future program you could bring a person in charge, and we could talk about that.
Sounds like a good plan.
Yeah. Let's talk about something warmer. A pool. Mm-hmm. The aquatics park and the efforts to raise money for that.
So actually, just this morning, we gave a donor presentation to a foundation that has requested a presentation from us, and it's a very large gift that we've sought from them, and that's where we stand. We stand about 50% of the way there from a project cost standpoint, that we need to raise between 25 and 30% more in order for us to achieve a level where other donors have said that they would support the project. So we're hopeful that community support and others. So if people want to see that project happen, certainly consider a letter to the editor encouraging our foundations and our businesses to step up and help us meet the gap.
Speaking of foundations, a lot of talk, and I get people who still call and say, why did the city tear down all those buildings downtown? No, it's the Mead-Witter Foundation. Is the discussion still continuing with them about their plans for that site?
That's right. We share their hope that it doesn't remain green space forever, at least the block that where the former Church's Drug and Book World and theater and the rest of the buildings stood. There's other property owners in that block, however, and so working with everybody together to hopefully put together a plan at some point. I'm not so certain we need the entire block for redevelopment. I think we can do a development without one single ownership or owning the entire block. Now, whereas the Triangle, there's a site efficiency standpoint that if you can get underground parking and you're going to do underground parking, you want the entire block because you're going to generally utilize that for site development. But as it relates to the former theater block, or that's commonly known as a theater block, yeah, you're right. That was a privately owned. All of that property is privately owned by somebody, and so therefore the city didn't engage in any ownership or acquisition or property demolition.
Now, but they still have requirements in terms of maintaining an appearance, correct?
That's right. So the code requires them to maintain, as the caller talked about with some of the concerns with other property, that it has to be either green spaced, in an interim basis, or graveled. There's a whole host of areas. They have to submit a plan before the permits can be pulled for demolition, and that plan has to be satisfied to meet the code.
Okay, we got to see. We've gotten Triangle. We've gotten the pool. Anything else we've missed so far today?
Well, we're in the midst of annual budget.
Okay,
right?
we were going to talk about the budget. So what are we looking at, or what are some of the challenges you're facing?
Well, one of the big challenges that we don't get this information, unfortunately, till late in the budget process. So last week, the state informed us of what our transportation aids are looking like. So considering all the funding sources that go into produce our budget, property taxes is only a portion of it. But one of them is general transportation aids, the money that comes from the state. This is allocated on a formula basis. So unfortunately, it penalizes communities like Wisconsin Rapids that doesn't have a lot of space to build new roads. The formula is based upon the amount and the quantity of roads. And you look at communities like Sun Prairie, who are adding roads and adding lane miles all the time, and so we're penalized. So we actually received a decrease in our general transportation aids. Now, there is a hold harmless, but that hold harmless is 15% less. So the state can pay us 15% less, which is a dramatic number, right? 15% is a significant amount of money potentially that we could lose in transportation aids in communities that are adding more street miles in their community.
So are you advocating a change in that formula? I'm taking it.
Well, we would like to see a no decrease, right? That at least our general transportation aids stay no less than flat, right? Because now we're preparing a budget that receives less money from the state, and therefore we have to either cut something else to make up that gap or do less road maintenance. Well, we know how less road maintenance would fare with our residents. None of us want to see that, but we're left to make some hard decisions, and I think that it's a long overdue situation as it relates to transportation aids that they address that formula and at least create a no decrease because we're going to have to do less otherwise.
Have you addressed that with our legislative delegation?
Not specifically the general transportation aids. We didn't get that information until last week. And it, year over year, last year our aids went up a little bit. So, it's all over the place, sadly. And I think, there's a lot of cities even smaller than ours that have a smaller tax base that have just as much of a demand or a need for them to maintain their roads.
Okay. Well, it's any goals in terms of taxes for or
Right. So our tax levy is flat in the sense that we can't, our operating budget generally can't grow. And in this budget, it cannot grow more than 1.39%. So there is a small growth measure in there. The 1.39% equates to about $150,000 in new money. So we have to account for all of our cost increases, all of our program increases within that number. There are some other carve-outs, I would call it, but our tax rate will not be set until we figure out how much borrowing we're going to do next year. But by and large, our tax rate will generally remain the same. It'll be just a question of how much outside of that, and then the other taxing jurisdictions, right? How much do they borrow as well?
Okay. Well, it's always a fun time, but it has the fact that your activity-based budgeting system, has that made it a little bit easier for you?
It makes it easier in the discussion around, well, this is the cost for brush pickup, for example. This is the cost for bulk item or garbage pickup. So then we can kind of objectively have a conversation and say, well, we're going to maybe do less of one service and do more of another, or shift resources around. But it also helps better define what we're actually doing with our labor dollars, right? Most of our budget is labor or wages and benefits in some format. And so it helps us better identify, have two compost sites, and the cost to maintain those two compost sites is quite shocking, and because largely it's wages and benefits that are allocated to that service, so it helps us understand where our dollars are going as opposed to just a big old black hole that it relates to our budget.
Well, as always, we appreciate the time, and I appreciate very much the number of calls that we had today, and we'll do it again next month.
Sounds good, Carl. Thank you, and thanks to our listeners.
And we want to also thank Wisconsin Rapids Community Media for being here as well. And that's going to wrap up today's edition of the Morning Magazine with the Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink.